It's a great pleasure for us to welcome Tom Berlin and Lovett Weems, who will be teaching today, tomorrow, and Friday. This afternoon, Dr. Weems will be teaching and sharing with us, and tomorrow morning, Tom Berlin will be sharing with us. Many of us have read Bearing Fruit, the book which they wrote together. We're having an annual conference so that we might be inspired, so that we might build our community with one another, and so that we might make some decisions and go forth to serve Christ in stronger ways. So that, a lot of you are using so that also. Dr. Weems is a graduate of Millsaps, of Candler, of SMU, and of Wesley Theological Seminary, and probably some other places. That shows the depth of his understanding and the height of his scholarship. One of the things I love most about Lovett Weems is the way that he speaks to people like me and like you in ways that are concrete and applicable in our lives, and we leave his presence able to be more faithful in concrete ways. You're going to have a wonderful time in this hour. This happens to be the 10th anniversary of the Lewis Center for Church Leadership. Dr. Weems founded this center, was recruited by Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. to do this work. And over the past 10 years, the Lewis Center has continued to gift our church in amazing ways. It was through the Lewis Center and their research that the young clergy issue, the scarcity of young clergy, was brought to light, and many of us began to refocus together on calling forth young clergy and supporting them as they move into ministry. It was the Lewis Center, through their research, that helped us focus again on transitions. When clergy leave and another clergy comes behind to a church, how to make those transitions healthy and fruitful. The clergy this year in our annual conference have been involved in keeping our sacred trust developed by the Lewis Center, so that clergy might have deep understanding and strong ethical sensibilities as we engage our work. The Lewis Center for Church Leadership focuses on leading change, helping churches advance their stewardship, and the practical pieces of ministry, which are very important for us all. The state of Mississippi has given the world many wonderful people, and the state of Mississippi gave the world Lovett Weems. He left Philadelphia, First United Methodist Church in Philadelphia, to move into higher education, going to St. Paul Theological Seminary and then on to Wesley Theological Seminary. The many things that I love and respect about Lovett Weems are these. He's a wonderful pastor. He's a keen observer. Welcome with me, Dr. Lovett Weems.
Introduction. I think it's the second best introduction I've ever had. I have to say second best because one time I was speaking to this group, and the person who was to introduce me never showed up, and I had to do it myself. But it is a great honor to be with those of you who are the leaders for the United Methodist Witness in this part of North Carolina. It's wonderful to be here with colleague Tom Berlin. It was a joy working with Tom on the book, Bearing Fruit. We have another one we've done together coming out this fall. And Tom and I are available to sign any copies of Bearing Fruit that you have, because they assured me at the Cokesbury store that if there was writing in the book, they would not let you return it. So, the theme for this session is fruitful ministry in changing times. What happens when the world changes? A pastor who'd been out of seminary 10 years came back and said, "When I was in seminary, The watchword was, we're going to change the world. We're going to change the world. A lot of us can identify with that spirit. He said, but what happened was, before we had a chance to change the world to be more like our values, the world just changed on its own. And so what I experience in church today and what I experience in the world around the church today is nothing like the church that I grew up in. It's nothing like the world I went to school in. Maybe you're feeling that way yourself. A lot of things have changed in the last 40 years or so. The sociologist Robert Wathnow referred to it as a restructuring of American religion. The historian Martin Marty talked about seismic shifts that have taken place among denominations and churches. And the theologian Harvey Cox talked about a religious deregulation that has gone on in this country. We've experienced that in our congregations and in our communities. So, when the world changes, as all of us agree it has, how do we respond? The most common response from the church is to keep doing things the same way. That makes no sense. But as the sociologist of religion, Nancy Ammerman, who studied thousands of churches, has said, when communities around a church change, or the needs of the people within the church change, churches have 6 or 7 different options from which they can choose in terms of how they will respond. But invariably, most churches select only one of those options, and that is to keep doing things the same way. In fact, they will keep doing them the same way, only a little bit harder. It's what I call vigorous inertia. So how does this happen? How does everything change and yet the church doesn't? Well, here's another counterintuitive concept. The longer a church has been in existence, the less connected it tends to be to its community, and the less knowledgeable it tends to be about its community. Now, it's hard to imagine that, but I've asked this question all over the country, and the answer is always the same. If there is a community, and one of those churches in that community has been there 150 years, and there's another church in that same community that just started having worship services 6 months ago, which of those 2 churches will have their finger on the pulse of that community the best? It's always the new one. How can that be? This other church has a 150-year head start. There shouldn't be a blade of grass cut in that community that they don't know about. There shouldn't be any movement in that community they don't know about because they've been involved there 150 years. But what happens is, in the early years of a church, the movement is outward. There's a great sensitivity to the community and the needs of the community and the needs of the people. But after a time, the church accumulates critical mass, you might say. They have their own building. They have their own preacher. Instead of reaching out then, the movement starts turning more inward. And instead of being, how do we reach out? It's how do we serve within? How do we serve one another? And how do we meet the pastoral care needs of those that are in? So what happens is there comes to be a kind of satisfaction with things as they are. You know, many churches have mission statements, but I've come to think that there's a group of churches, I don't know how many, maybe it's 70, maybe it's 75%, I don't know, for whom there is an unspoken operative mission. And that is, the mission of our church is to stay as good as we are. Now, organizationally, that's terrible because it means eventually you're going to die. Organizations are like organisms. You only continue as you change and adapt. But more importantly, it is terrible theologically. That is, we can never take the current state of things and say that this is synonymous with God's ultimate will. Yes, we believe God has been active in the past, but we also believe that God is active in the present. And we also believe that this God of the past and God of the present has a not yet for all of us. So you may be here from a congregation about which you are very excited, and I hope you are. You're excited about the mission outreach. You're excited about the worship. You're excited about a lot of things. But would you really want to stand before this group and say, our church is so good, it now has become everything God ever intends for it to be? That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about rejecting the past. We're talking about building on the past. We're talking about saying, oh God, thank you for what you did in the past. Thank you for your continuing presence today. And now, oh God, with deep gratitude and humility, we kneel in prayer saying, show us the next step. Show us the next chapter you have for us. And this is where the concept of fruitfulness can be very, very helpful. Success is not a biblical concept, but fruitfulness is. The verse from John is very revealing. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me, you can do nothing. You find there both the challenge and the necessity of bearing fruit, and also the recognition that there is no fruitfulness unless we stay connected to the source of our nourishment. Stay connected to the vine. Now, not only is fruitfulness a biblical concept, it's very much a Wesleyan concept. You know, our movements over time have always used questions, learning that from John Wesley. And in John Wesley's day, he didn't need a board of ordained ministry. He was the board of ordained ministry. And he had only 3 questions, but they were good ones. Have they faith? Have they gifts? Have they faith? Have they faith? Have they gifts? Have they fruit? And it's this concept of fruitfulness that caused Wesley to permit some things that in theory he wasn't sure were absolutely proper. For example, lay preaching. He wasn't sure that lay preaching was right. And so when he heard that a man named Thomas Maxfield, an assistant to Charles Wesley, was preaching when Charles Wesley would be away, he set out to command Maxfield to quit preaching. But on his way, he stopped by to visit his mother, Susanna Wesley, and he told her what he was going to do. And Susanna Wesley, who herself didn't believe in lay preaching, said to John Wesley, "You be very careful what you do. You must promise me that before you forbid him to preach, you must go and hear him preach and see if there is any fruit from that preaching." And Wesley did that. He saw the fruitfulness of the preaching and gave his blessings to it. The same was true with women preaching. In theory, Wesley wasn't so sure about that, but when he saw there was so much fruitfulness from their preaching, he said, "This must be of God." In fact, the concept of fruitfulness helped him kind of rise above his principles sometimes, as I would put it, to do the right thing for the gospel. So let's see what we can learn about fruitfulness that might help us in our congregations. One thing is that fruitfulness begins long before the harvest. As soon as we start talking about fruitful churches and fruitful ministry, we almost immediately jump to the end of the process. So if we're talking about fruitful financial stewardship, we immediately think, what stewardship program will we use? Or how many pledges did we get? Or what are we going to do in the fall? Now think about this from the perspective of a farmer. And of course, the fruitfulness language from the Bible, like much of the language, is based on an agricultural economy. The farmer gives thought to the harvest, but every day is not harvest day. Farmers don't spend all year doing nothing, and then when it's harvest time, they say, "Oh, let's get some help, let's get some trucks, let's go bring in the harvest." It doesn't work that way. Now, if people know nothing about farming, they might along the way look out at people working and say how sad that is. They're going to work all day and have nothing to bring home to show for it. Yes, that's right, much of the time. But the farmer knows that to have that good harvest, that the reasons for that start way before. It's almost like if we were a farmer with our church mindset, and we said, "Now here's another farmer that's far more fruitful than you are," and we had a conversation, we would say, "What kind of truck did you use for that harvest? And how many people did you hire to help you? And what time of the day did you start?" The farmers say, "That's the wrong kid to start with. A lot of things have got to happen." Sometimes we don't want to do that hard work, but the reality is the reasons for fruitfulness have normally passed by before fruitfulness comes. Let's say in your church today, you've got the best choir you've ever had. In fact, you think you've got the best choir of any church around you. I guarantee you, if that's the case, the reason for that great choir is not last Wednesday night's choir rehearsal. If you've got an exciting youth ministry, you're serving the needs of youth of the church, you're reaching youth in the community. It's mission oriented, it's spiritually based. If you've got a fantastically fruitful youth ministry, chances are the reasons for that are not things that happen at the last youth council meeting. In fact, that great youth ministry or that great choir, the reasons may go back farther than any of the people who are currently part of it. The reasons for fruitfulness have usually passed by before fruitfulness comes. But it's that hard part that we avoid sometimes. It's like John Wesley said, that we seek the end of grace without practicing the means of grace. We seek the ends of grace without practicing the means of grace. And in our churches, a perfect example of it is financial stewardship. We go all year with what some sociologists have found as an unspoken conspiracy between clergy and laity. That is, clergy are not comfortable talking about money, and laity are very happy for them not to talk about money. And so with a wink and a nod, they go all year. Not a single thing is said about money, because we're only going to devote 1 week or 2 weeks or maybe 4 weeks to it. So after all year doing nothing, then we come in with that spectacular whatever the program is, and then it doesn't do what we thought it was going to do. Surprise, surprise, it's like the farmer who stays home watching soap operas all year and then at harvest time goes out and is surprised to find that there's not much of a harvest this year. So the reasons for fruitfulness have normally passed by before fruitfulness comes. So we have to go back to the beginning. Now, the desired harvest shapes everything else. That you don't begin with harvest day, but you do have to have an image, a picture. Tom, as they might tell you, comes from Winchester, Virginia, where there are lots and lots of apples grown. And those who grow apples, they have a picture in their mind of what those apples will look like if they really turn out the way they hope they will that year. And what it takes to get there shapes everything else. Now, in a traditional way of thinking in organizations, at the top of this pyramid, you'd have a leader or leaders, and they would think up good things to do, and all the rest of us would work hard trying to do that. But what we're suggesting here is an inverted pyramid, where at the top of that is the vision or the desired harvest. And that becomes the invisible leader. And the role of those of us who are leaders is found at the bottom. And it is keeping the herd moving west. It's keeping everybody in alignment with the vision. And if there is someone or some group within the church that kicks out of that inverted pyramid to set up shop for themselves outside the vision, then that conversation is not one of authority or prerogative. It's one of faithfulness to the vision we've discerned to be God's vision. So we are stewards of the vision. We are people helping to move things along. But one of the frustrating things for many of us is the realization that often after a lot of work, a new mission statement or a new vision statement or both are adopted, and 6 months later, nothing seems different in the church. A year later, nothing seems different. And here's what I think happens. Even if you do it the right way, you spend good time in prayer, you spend time in Bible study, you do a good analysis of the congregation, you do a good analysis of the community, you have lots of meetings, you use lots of newsprint, you take lots of votes. And then once you have it, maybe even you put it on the front of your bulletin. Maybe even you recite it on Sunday morning. Maybe even you laminate it. Even when you do all those things, 6 months later, you can't figure out what's different. And here's why. Because you have that new mission, but worship planning goes on just like it always did. The Sunday school runs the way it always did. The finance folks do their work the way they've always done it. The trustees do their work the way they've always done it. And so no wonder we have to throw up our hands and say we've got a great mission statement, but not much has changed. Now, another model that helps make fruitfulness more likely would begin with the mission of the congregation and then say every group we have within the church, every committee, every team, every work group, they are brought into existence for one reason and one reason only: to contribute to the fulfillment of this mission. So in essence, the mission gives birth to all of the various groups. Some are illustrated here on this slide. So instead of these being independent groups, they all are birthed by the mission. They have no life apart from the mission, and their whole purpose is to contribute to that mission. Now, they have distinctive responsibilities, but they all contribute to the mission. None are silos, and none can do their work without reference to the mission. And then even further, let's take the first box there of worship. It will have its own mission then. And then it will have expressions of that mission through the worship services, through music, sermons, liturgy. All of these things exist not as ends in themselves, but to carry out the mission of worship, which we've already seen is contributing to the mission of the congregation. Because unless we can think in this kind of way, then the choir may start thinking that they're about the choir, or at least that they're about music, instead of they're about connecting people with the love of God through music and worship. So in that sense, like, if the issue is who selects the music, well, that's not the big question. whoever selects the music is free to select any music they want, just so long as it connects people with the love of God in Jesus Christ. But no one is free to select music that's not connecting anybody with anything, you see? So, everything is seen in light of this. Otherwise, the person that does the bulletin will think they're about doing a bulletin. No. We only have a bulletin to help carry out the mission of worship. And so, how does that affect that? Our ushers, they may think they're about ushering. They may think they're about handing bulletins out. Say, no. The only reason we give you those bulletins is for you to have people feel more comfortable if they have something to hold in their hands. Otherwise, we just put a table there. We don't need people handing out bulletins. But we need ushers to help us connect people with the love of God through worship. And you're often the first eyes of Christ they will see when they arrive. So then, as Bishop Ward mentioned, these two words, what Tom and I call the two most important words for fruitful ministry, so that. I tell in the book, and if you've read the book, that's the script, this is the movie you're getting right now, about the first time I ever used the so that exercise. It was at a large teaching church for their leadership institute. There were about 100 people in the workshop, about half clergy, half lay, all from churches seeking to do really good things. And I said, how many of you know what I'm talking about if I say Vacation Bible School or Vacation Church School? And they all lifted their hands. So I said, complete this sentence. Next summer, our church will have Vacation Bible School, so that. And they started working. And immediately I knew there was a problem. Nobody was writing. So I gave them some extra time. And then I said, well, I know some of you haven't completed your assignment yet, but let's just see if some of you have. And so one person got up and read this statement. Next summer, our church will have Vacation Bible School so that the children of our church will experience Vacation Bible School. I said, okay. Is there another one? Somebody else said, next summer our church will have Vacation Bible School so that children will experience church as fun. I said, we sure don't need to buy literature for that. I said, well, you know, this is a start, but would it help if maybe you got into some small groups to kind of help share your wisdom with one another? And they said, yes. So they got together, and they didn't do a lot better there. But finally, somebody came up with this one. Next summer, our church will have Vacation Bible School so that the children of our church will come to know and love God more, and we will reach children in the community we've not yet reached. I said, okay, let's go with that. I said, now, if I'm in your church before you have that so that, and you come to me and say, Lovett, the church council wants you to direct Bible school this summer. If I say yes to that, I assume that means you want me to find a date, pick a time, order some literature, recruit some teachers, get somebody to work with refreshments, somebody to work with crafts and all. And that week will come, we'll have Bible school. Maybe a few weeks later, I'm asked to come to the church council, and the chair says, we've asked Lovett to come. You know, we asked him to direct the Bible school. A lot of you thought that wasn't a good idea, but we went ahead anyway, and he did a pretty good job, I think. And so, Lovett, tell us a little bit. And I said, well, golly, this was my first time. I didn't know a lot, but I think it went well. And the chair says, well, what about the rest of you? Yeah, we heard it went well. Good. Let's give Lovett some applause, and you can leave now. And that would be it. That's how it happened. But now we've got another situation, Because now you come to me and you say, Lovett, God has led us to plan a vacation Bible school for next summer so that the children of our church can come to know and love God more, and we can reach children in the community we've not yet reached. Now, if I say yes to that, I've said yes to a very different proposition. Because there were some people I knew who, if you want them to teach a class, they could teach a class. They can't do that though. You see? It's going to tell me a lot about how I do my work. It's going to tell me probably if it should be in the daytime or at night. It's going to tell me whether I can charge a fee or not. It's going to tell me whether the publicity needs to be in one language or two. It's going to tell me who I need for volunteers. It's going to tell me a lot of things, you see. But the sad thing is, in all these churches, every year they're having vacation Bible school, and they, for the life of them, couldn't come up with a good so that for it. And think about our churches. Maybe we don't have a so that. Here's the vacation Bible school question. Do we have Bible school set for this summer? Yes. Whew, good. Great. Did we have Bible school? Yes. Good. Whew. We still have a choir? Yes. What about Sunday school? Yeah, good. What about youth group? We still have, good. I mean, they may not be doing anything, but the questions we ask are about activities instead of are they doing what God has called us to do with that. Somebody came to me, they'd been working with a Saturday night service for the last couple of years, had 15 or 20 people after 2 years. And I said, well, go back to the beginning when you were planning this. And I'm saying, not that you would have used this language, but given what the purpose was, if you were to put it in so that language, we will begin a Saturday night service so that, what would that founding group have, how would they have completed the sentence? So that our church will have a Saturday night service. I said, well, you've got one of those. For sure you've got that. Not much of one, but you've got one, you see. But if they said, we will begin a Saturday night service so that people who cannot worship on Sunday because of employment or other reasons, and people who are not currently worshiping on Sunday will have an opportunity to worship. That's going to determine who you target. It's going to determine how you shape the service, what you do about music, all of those things. So that leads to planning. The desired harvest shapes all planning. Just like that farmer. The farmer has to have a picture of what that ideal crop's going to look like. You don't begin there, except that's what's going to shape everything. But you go back and you begin, like with planning. The harvest you see is going to say a lot about what seeds you use to plant. And so you have to have your planning shaped by the ultimate harvest. Now, here's what I'd call the typical ministry planning process. You develop a plan. Let's say the church wants to reach more young people. So they have a group that comes up with a lot of ideas. We will have a youth Sunday once a year. We'll have youth read scripture once a month. We'll highlight the youth that are finishing high school. We will paint the youth room. There'll be a whole list of things to do. And then during the year, as the church council meets, well, we were going to paint the room, and we have painted that room. Good. We were going to have youth read scripture, and they read scripture. So you move down. So you make your plan of activities, and then you carefully go through doing all those activities. That is, you implement the plan. And then you just hope that something good is going to happen out of it. You just hope that if we do enough things and work hard enough, something good is going to happen. Let me suggest another way of thinking about things, what I'd call a fruitful ministry planning. First of all, you've got to have that picture of the desired harvest. You may not have a great choir now, but you've got to have some idea of what a great choir would be like. You may not have a great youth ministry now, but you've got to have some idea of what that youth ministry would look like, because then you have a direction in which to move. Vince Lombardi said that the best football coaches always have in their mind a picture of that offensive play run perfectly, or that defensive formation executed perfectly. Even, he said, if as a coach you never have had a team that did it perfectly, you still have to have a picture of what it would look like if anybody ever did it right, in order to know in which direction to coach. And so we have to have a sense of where we're going to know in which direction to pray, in which direction to give our resources. And then you make some beginning plans and first steps. So you feel called to begin a singles ministry. Instead of laying out a whole series of plans, you decide on some first steps. And then you innovate and learn. Because pretty soon you thought it was going to be one singles group, but then pretty soon you realize that we're talking about two different groups. And you thought it was going to be more focused this way, but all the energy is moving in another way. So you innovate and learn. And if you keep your eye on the goal, then you won't get off track. But if you succeed in fruitfulness in any of these things, it's not going to be a straight line. It's going to be more of the trial and error. And then, fruitfulness is for focus and direction, not judgment. So what does this mean about goals and numbers, reporting and accountability? That's a big part of our life in the church today, and there's a good bit of resistance to the focusing on the numbers. But remember, we do all of this counting primarily to learn, not for judgment. Chances are, if you had that for a vacation Bible school and it didn't work out, let's say you didn't reach any children in the community that you had not reached before, you will have learned a lot. You may have learned we've got to get started earlier. We've got to get some community partners involved in this if we're going to reach different people. You will learn. That's the primary goal. And we have a model already. You see, the resistance today is when people are being asked to set a goal this year for professions of faith, or for worship attendance, or for mission groups or small groups. That's where we get uncomfortable. But folks, we have a model that's tried and true that most of us use every year. It's called a budget. Think about it. That budget that we approve, that's our numerical goal for the year. And not only do we approve it, we monitor it. We report on it. Many of our churches will even send letters to members letting them know where they are in their own giving. Just, always thinking of the other person that way, We pay attention to it. But for 90% of our churches, at the end of the year, we don't raise whatever that top figure was. We usually come close. We usually have a balanced budget because not all of our line items get spent 100%. We know that. But at the end of the year, we don't quite make that goal often. But you know what we do the next year? We do it again. We didn't make it. We didn't make the number we laid out. We're going to do it again. And so we set that new goal, and we monitor it, and we report on it. Most churches have a committee that even meets monthly about it. The goal, the number. And maybe we don't make it, and then we do it again. All we're saying is, think of professions of faith that way. Think of attendance that way. Because if we set the goal and we monitor and we pay attention to it, chances are something will happen. And then finally this. Who benefits when we focus on numbers? People. Here's a church. Over the last 20 years, the number of children that they serve has gone down each year. But they know that they're surrounded in that community by children. And so they set out to have a goal of increasing the number of children involved in ministry through their congregation over the next year. And some of the things that become a part of achieving that is redoing the rooms, recruiting some new teachers, dividing the classes into more age-appropriate groupings, doing some teacher training, making some connections in a nearby trailer park, doing some publicity, lots of things. And let's say a year later, they have 25% more children than they did a year prior. Here's my question. Who benefited from that focus on numbers? That is, we want to do our ministry in the next year so that we are reaching more children a year from now than we are today. Who benefited from that? The children who were already there, and the children who would not have been there, and their parents. Who benefits? People. Here's a church. A year ago, they had 30 of the children in their church were active. A year later, 28 of them are active. So that doesn't seem a big loss, unless you're one of those two children. It'd be like the grandparent one night who takes 4 of the grandchildren out to the mall for some shopping and then comes home with only 3 of them. So people start getting upset, and the grandparent says, "Hey, 3/4, that's pretty good," you know. 3 out of 4, what do you expect? Yes. Well, my prayer for you is not only that you'll come to have a heart for fruitfulness, and not only that you will pray for fruitfulness, and not only that you will work for fruitfulness, but that God will richly bless all of your faithfulness with abundant fruitfulness for the reign of God. Thank you.